Hello, and thank you for joining this important effort. My name is Ramesh Butch, and I am the Conservation Acquisitions Director for the North Florida Land Trust. Citrus County has asked the Land Trust to assist them with determining if a locally funded land conservation program is feasible. The broad goal of such programs is to protect residents' quality of life through protecting the natural, economic, and cultural resources present. Later on, you'll hear more about conservation values from my colleague Heather Nagy. But first, what is the North Florida Land Trust, and what is our role here? We are a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to work with private landowners who want to conserve their land forever. We work with government and private partners, stakeholders, the public, and landowners to preserve these lands that not only protects and continues their ways of life, but also preserves the natural foundations of community and creates safe havens for wildlife.
Founded in 1999, we have protected over 123,000 acres in Florida. We use a variety of tools, including donations and purchases of land, conservation easements, and life estates. Each is voluntarily negotiated. None of the partners we work with uses condemnation or any form of eminent domain authority to conserve property. Our main service area includes counties in Northeast Florida, from Nassau County south to Flagler County, west to Clay County, and portions of 8 other counties that overlap our Ocala to Osceola wildlife corridor. But we work all over the state when asked to help communities preserve their priority landscapes, or as in this case, assisting communities decide if a local land conservation program is right for them. And Citrus County needs you. Citrus County is responding to citizens' requests to preserve what makes this area special. Your input on exactly which lands and what values should be protected is vital. A successful program is one that has protected the land that characterizes the very values the community has identified as worthy, be it surface waters, agricultural lands, floodplains, or habitats for endangered species. We have divided this presentation into two parts, after which you will have the opportunity to vote on your top priorities. First, we will outline the process to create and implement a local land conservation program. Second, Heather will describe the 7 typical conservation values that communities choose when considering what lands they want to protect. Finally, you'll have the opportunity to vote on which of these are your top 3 conservation values. We will add your vote to those we have already collected from other county residents at the live workshops, from the county commissioners, and from the subject matter experts. We will then report back to the county commission with the results and some recommendations. If you're participating in this effort, I know that you love Citrus County and suspect that some of that comes from the character of this landscape. Open spaces you might have roamed as a kid, imagining you're an early explorer, or still hunt, hike, birdwatch, fish, or paddle. Wildlife also need corridors to roam, food, habitat, shelter, and space to thrive. Open space preserves these habitats. These are some of the more obvious benefits of open space. Some others you may not have considered. One thing we learned from COVID was that global food supply lines are susceptible to interruption. We saw empty food shelves, something Americans have not seen in generations. So preserving our local food supply, our agricultural spaces, our food security is critical to our national security. Your drinking water is essentially old rainfall. We mine it from deep underground or pull it from lakes and rivers. Its quality has a lot to do with the ground it falls on and runs off of before we capture it. Open spaces slow down stormwater and floodwater, trap it, clean it, and helps recharge those drinking water supplies. Open space adds economic value to communities, value reflected in the higher value of homes with access to open space amenities. Speaking of national security, preserving open spaces around our military installations allows our military forces to train to their maximum potential, ensuring their mission readiness. Converting open spaces next to bases to incompatible uses, such as houses or retail, forces the military to withdraw from the fence lines, reducing their training area and limiting their use of certain equipment and operations, and creates potential safety issues for service personnel and civilians. Land conservation is the permanent protection of these open spaces to preserve these benefits, because none of these benefits are guaranteed If we do not protect the lands that generates these benefits, they will degrade and disappear forever. If a land conservation program is approved and funded, the county will negotiate with willing landowners for the purchase of their property or the purchase of conservation easements on their property, if that is the right tool. Let me stop here for a minute and briefly explain what a conservation easement is and how one might be suitable for certain lands in Citrus County. In American property law, your ownership of land can be thought of as a bundle of sticks. Each stick represents the legal right to use your property. Examples are your right to grow trees, mine for minerals, build houses, hunt, and to exclude others from using it, to sell it or pass it on to your heirs. In a conservation easement negotiation, the landowner separates that intact bundle into two separate bundles. One bundle has the rights the landowner wants to retain, start using, or might want to use in the future. Examples would be to continue to grow trees, running cattle, or to build an additional home for a family member in the future. The second bundle, the conservation easement bundle, has the rights that, if used, would harm the conservation value property. An example might be mining or building all of the houses allowed by zoning. When the landowner voluntarily sells or donates that second bundle, they are separated from the property forever. That means they can never be used. The landowner retains everything they want and is compensated for agreeing to remove the second bundle. That would damage the property. Compensation to the landowner can either be cash received from the sale of those rights or income tax benefits that might accrue from the donation of those property rights as part of the conservation easement transaction. And there is a tried and true playbook to successfully creating and running these land conservation programs so that you end up with the portfolio you wanted. We call it greenprinting. Greenprinting allows a community to use land conservation practices to preserve place as part of their identity, who they are. It is based on input from subject matter experts, folks knowledgeable about Citrus County and its resources, agriculture, economy, and culture, your county commission, and most importantly, you, the public, to determine the program's priorities. The subject matter experts, folks who have a special interest or knowledge of the open space benefits in Citrus County, help us orient to Citrus County to understand more about the resources there and the values the community has in saving them. We take their input and translate them to conservation values based on the available science, so that those values may be mapped, shown to the public, and later used when evaluating competing property nominations. We then ask the public and elected leaders to choose their top priorities among the many conservation values. We present all our findings and the top ranked conservation priorities in Section 1 of the Greenprint Report, as well as a suggested program outline, including recommended best practices in Section 2. One such best practice is what we call the line of sight approach, using a hunting or target practice analogy. It begins with knowing what values and benefits the community wants to save. The target is a portfolio of protected lands that generates those benefits. To make sure you hit the target, we recommend two critical pieces are put into place. First, if using a referendum to raise funds, the language in the ballot must refer to the specific values and benefits that need to be saved. Second, a set of criteria should be used to evaluate nominated property to assess how well those properties provide the benefits. For example, if more access to nature-based recreation is needed, then the property should be evaluated for proximity to trails and existing parks, or has the kinds of habitat and features that would interest outdoor enthusiasts. Those that do should score well. Let's go through the process. I've divided it into three parts, each depicted in a different color on the slide. It all starts with the public recognizing that irreplaceable lands are being converted and their special character is being lost. That concern is expressed publicly. The county responds by requesting help to determine how best to address those losses. Task one is to get the opinions from the subject matter experts and the county commission to determine what conservation values are present and what are the Citrus County Commission priorities. This was completed in January and presented to the county commission in January 27th. Task two identifies the community's conservation values. That is the purpose of this online survey and the in-person workshops we're holding throughout the county. We ask what is being lost and what conservation values are important to you. The County Commission approves the plan and moves forward with a feasibility study that helps the county decide how to fund a potential program. This information is provided to the county, and the data shows if the community wants to do this and pay for it, then the county can adopt an ordinance and place the question before the voters in a referendum. If passed, then the county will again let the public and landowners know of the opportunity to nominate land for protection and begin to evaluate applications using the criteria that arise from the conservation values you identify here and that were a part of the referendum. Recall, that is the line of sight. An example would be if the public identified drinking water protection as a priority, then property that has aquifer recharge potential or recharge for drinking water supplies would be included. If they wanted farmlands protected, then property nominated that had active agriculture would also score highly. As a reminder, if a property is nominated and the landowner does not want to be considered, they may withdraw their property from further consideration at any time. If something changes and they want to be considered once again, they need only to contact the county. We bring up referenda because if the Greenprint process shows that there is community support for preserving open space, a land conservation program to protect those open spaces will require funding. But land conservation is not an essential core service for government, and it should be funded without impairing the county's ability to pay for core services, such as roads, sewers, and emergency services. Referenda are nearly always used to provide funding for local land conservation programs. And in Florida, land conservation referenda pass. Of the 123 referenda put to voters since 1999, 105 or 85% have passed, with 64% of the voters in favor. Voters have approved an additional $5.5 billion in local taxes to pay for these programs. This money is either used by the county to preserve lands important to the community or to attract and match state and federal land conservation funds, funds which may not have come back to the community without this local match. In the slide is an example ballot from Polk County. The red text are the areas and variables that you determine through the green printing process. The first are the conservation values that come from this workshop and input to the commissioners and subject matter experts. The method and amount are determined by the county depending on the input from the process, including information about the voters' tolerance for how much they can pay annually. Typically, this ranges from tens to a couple of $100s per household per year. A lot depends on the community, the sources used, for example, sales taxes, which visitors also pay, and also the length of time that the tax is levied. So today, we ask you to help define what are the priority conservation values so we can provide that information to the county. I'll now turn this over to Heather, and she can walk you through the conservation value themes that we have developed for Citrus County.
I'm Heather Nagy, Strategic Initiatives Manager for the North Florida Land Trust, and I will be leading this section on conservation values. As Ramesh outlined earlier in his discussion on the line of sight, Citrus County wants to ensure that the lands they eventually end up protecting and managing match the types of lands originally desired by the public. This can be done by determining what conservation values the public wants to see protected in Citrus County's land conservation program. To begin, something most people will think of when they think of conservation lands is protecting threatened and endangered species and habitats. Protecting Florida's threatened and endangered species and habitats is very important because it saves our native fish, plants, and other wildlife from going extinct. This map displays the locations of some of Citrus County's threatened species, including the Florida scrub jay and the Florida manatee. Additionally, it shows rare habitats that have been identified by the state of Florida as important for conservation. These are habitat types that are not well represented by existing conservation lands and should be a priority for future conservation efforts. The next conservation value we think may be important to Citrus County residents is the protection of surface water features. This map displays all types of surface waters, including lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. The stars on some of the lakes represent total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, and minimum flows and levels, or MFLs, which set limits on how much pollution can enter a lake and how much water can be withdrawn from a lake, respectively. Finally, we've also displayed the high-risk FEMA flood zones on this map to show the areas of the county at risk of flooding, those areas that fall within the 100-year floodplain. We've also identified drinking water as a conservation value. Conservation lands can help protect our drinking water in many ways, including filtering water to ensure it remains clean and by replenishing our groundwater supply to make sure we have a reliable source of water now and in the future. This map displays areas of the county that have high potential for recharging aquifers, natural systems, and the water supply. In addition, this map displays locations of public water supply wells, which service communities and public buildings, and known private wells. This next map displays wildlife and conservation corridors. This conservation value is the connecting of existing conservation lands to build large, contiguous natural areas. Connected landscapes support biodiversity by allowing wildlife to move freely to access food, water, shelter, and breeding habitat. This map shows the location of existing conservation lands, as well as the boundaries of several conservation corridors that already exist in Citrus County. By conserving areas within these existing corridors, Citrus County can leverage partnerships and existing funding to protect high priority lands and allow for the most connectivity between landscapes. Another conservation value that Citrus County residents may be interested in protecting are agricultural lands. This map has a lot of colors, all representing different types of agriculture, such as farms, ranches, and tree plantations. This shows that there is a significant amount of agricultural land within Citrus County worthy of protecting. Conserving these working landscapes helps to ensure that they will not be converted to non-agricultural uses, and it also ensures farmers and ranchers can maintain their way of life and pass it on to the next generation. A conservation value that many counties are now incorporating into local land conservation programs is access to recreation. Parks and recreation spaces enable residents in a community to experience nature, engage in exercise, and enjoy leisure time in the natural environment. In addition, parks provide positive economic benefits, including enhancing property values, spurring local economies, and attracting new residents and businesses. This map shows the location of lands in Citrus County that are currently accessible to residents for recreation. It also shows existing recreational trails, including paddle trails, hiking, biking, and equestrian trails, and existing boat ramps. Finally, another potential conservation value in Citrus County is the protection of historic and cultural resources. Citrus County has a rich rural and agricultural history, and preserving historical areas and artifacts preserves and promotes the history of the county. Some local land conservation programs are now including historical and cultural resources as a conservation value, as it provides a dedicated source of funding to protect lands that contain these types of resources. This map shows the locations of some of the historic and cultural resources in Citrus County. There are several historical districts that contain historic home sites, military areas, agricultural lands, churches and railroad corridors, as well as many historical structures that are eligible to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Here are all 7 conservation values. In a moment, you will have the opportunity to vote on your top 3 conservation values.
Thanks, Heather. That was a great explanation of what conservation values are and the ones that exist in Citrus County. So going back to the referendum example for a moment, remember we're going to suggest that the County Commission use the information you have provided here as to what are your priority conservation values to select the kinds of lands for protection using the funding that may be raised. So again, looking at this language, you'll notice that the first line, it talks about water resources, environmental lands, and fish and wildlife habitat. You can see these 3 values in the 7 themes that Heather described. And these values rose to the top for Polk County voters. It's now your job to prioritize which of those 7 you want to see in a referendum that might be for Citrus County. If the county chooses another route to raise funds, this information should still be used to guide the use of those funds, however they're raised. So now we come to the part where you get to have your say. Before you do though, remember the timeline. After we hold the in-person workshops and gather the votes from those votes, we'll merge them with the Commissioner's priorities and your votes from this online survey and others. Those will be tabulated and the top 3 scoring conservation values will be presented to the Commission, along with a how-to manual for running a land conservation program. You can now close this YouTube video and return to the SurveyMonkey page that you first opened to get to this presentation. If you found your way to this presentation without first logging on to the SurveyMonkey page, you can get to the survey using the QR code on the screen or clicking the link or typing it into your internet browser. When you get to that SurveyMonkey page, you'll find Heather's summary of the 7 conservation themes and the maps. Please follow the directions to enter information and to log in your votes for your top 3 conservation values. Don't forget to scroll all the way down and click Done when you're finished. Again, we and Citrus County thank you for participating in this very important initiative. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us or Citrus County if you need any more information. Thank you.